Today we're going to talk about the topic of scaling up companies, scaling a business, and also scaling different parts of businesses, for example, sales and marketing, and so forth. So basically about growth, this is what we're going to talk about today. And I'm not gonna be boring with tons of like theory and strategies and things like that. I'm gonna be talking about anonymously about a use case, about a client call we had yesterday with a German storage company that are like up for scaling. They're really interested to really like hit the gas pedal, so to speak. And it's a hot topic, and we are all assuming that the topic of energy and energy storage, in particular, it's going to be an immense topic, an immense amount of demand in the near future, especially in Europe and Germany. I'm going to be talking about another call I had done with one of my clients who is an AI agency and a software development agency, which is one of my core clients usually, and the implications and the way of thinking a lot of these really techie people have, and how to translate it into the reality, into business cases, because it's, despite the fact we have a lot of change in very periods of time, certain things never change. For example, the two worlds of the really techie people that they think techie, and then the business people who are actually trying to make some money and get the ball rolling and actually to run a profitable business and scale it up and then maybe sell it to a bigger business and so forth. And these two worlds very often they collide, they don't talk the same language, and it's sometimes really difficult to be in a meeting with these sorts of different people. And since the time that I decided to do my final studies, ITBML, which is basically IT, business management and languages. So it's communication, foreign languages even, but also communication. I studied French, Italian, a little bit of Japanese and English, obviously, because I was in England, and obviously I'm a German. And at the same time, business management, people management, and all these kind of topics. So this is evergreen topics that I'm going to be talking about today. And it can be really, really, really stressful, because we have a problem, we want a solution, we want to sell the solution to our client, in this case, like a storage company, an energy storage company, and who's doing consulting in that area, and they then have a big network of other people and everything. So basically, we had like probably an overall budget to spend. It's like a 7-figure budget, but we're probably going to be starting with a 6-figure per year. And I'm going to talk about the part of solution, the technical part of the solution, which is going to be the major pain that was identified is the automized pre-qualification of new clients. So it is up to us now to figure out a system to automate the pre-qualification process of new clients. Okay, it could be complex, so we're going to talk about this today as well as I can. So basically, what we're going to be talking about today is we have a client who's getting requests inside. So basically, we have, in this case here, we have the client, and the task is scaling the lead qualification process. So how do you qualify a lead? First of all, before you can automate it, you need to understand how to qualify a lead. Is by asking questions. Okay, so setting a filter based on questions. Okay, so basically what you would do, very, very old school, like in the phone call, like, having a telesales, asking a bunch of questions, having your sales script and all this kind of stuff. You would try to pin it down on a piece of paper, and there's one solution for this, is that you're going to be using like a filter in It could be like, box and ready software. I'm gonna tell you like 3 different ones that you may use or not use. One is like yacht forms. The other one is type forms. So you take this, you pay a couple of €100 a month, and you set this as a pre-filter to any sort of like lead that's coming in. What lead? Where is it coming from, the lead? It doesn't really matter. Even if you're on the phone, you can post a link or you can give people a link where to find this form, and they have to go through, otherwise they're not gonna successfully be passed on to the next stage, which is gonna be maybe a sales rep call or whatever. If you're like setter calls as a very low qualified people that don't cost much, they will use this as a pre-qualification. Now you can obviously substitute these setter, if you wanted to try this, via AI. So what you can do instead of this, basically you can have like a vector-based voice AI chatbot. So it's a vector-based voice AI, which is also at the same time could be a chatbot, which is basically a room where these questions that like a setter, like a person, a telesales would ask, is asked by the AI. Before you can do this, obviously, you need to train these voice bots. So you have different companies now that are basically telling their setters, their telesales to train these voice bots. So it's like kind of cool. And the reason, and then you can, and if you do this with the AI here, with this kind of like vector-based thing, you basically can substitute not only the setter, the person who's doing the setting calls, the very basic mechanical calls, that where you don't need to talk a lot of complex discussions, okay? And in that sense, the voice AI maybe after a while training, maybe even able to do a better job, a much better job than the setter. But that's down to the case, and how much training you give it, and it's also like costly to develop this. So the big companies obviously doing this because they have the money, but the smaller companies, they need to think, okay, am I going to do something with the forms, or am I going to do something with the vector-based, Am I going to go here with the big sum of money? Because here you need like, just for the first initial phase, the first couple of weeks, you probably need like 20K, 50K just to get it up and running in a sort of sense. But then you can scale up because you can have that being rolled out to an infinite number. All you need to do is like be aware that the tokens cost you money, the AI and everything, and also that you have enough server power behind. But if you have like 100 quests a day or 1,000, the AI doesn't care. The volume is not the issue anymore, okay? And with the analog way, you would need to hire people. It's always stressful. You need a team leader from 4 or 5 people upwards, who is then, you need a trainer who trains the telesales and everything. So here you need to do the training as well, but only once, and once it's up and running, you can basically infinitely scale it. And it's quite powerful, but it has a high initial cost. But okay, it depends on the case. But here, it's also a way of doing it, and this is the advantages. You can implement them within a couple of days. Connect it to your CRM, Go high level, Pipedrive, it doesn't matter, HubSpot, Salesforce, whatever, Odoo, and then up and running. But there's another advantage. It is very mechanical, it's the disadvantage, but every disadvantage, very often, every disadvantage is an advantage. So basically, the disadvantage is that it's like a multiple choice. I mean, you can type in some things, but sometimes you can also multiple choice and things. So it's like very structured, very stiff kind of thing. And in many cases, people get bored filling in the forms. This is also why you do like page by page. So if you have a form that's like 20 pages or 10 pages to truly qualify a certain prospect in this case, you would have then, you only see one page. And then once the user is basically filled in this one page, he clicks go, and then the second page. So it's like step by step. It's like, if you climb a mountain, you don't think about the 5 kilometers you have to climb. You think only about the next 500 meters. And then once you've done that, you think about the next 500 meters. That's the psychology of it, and it works pretty well. the advantage of it is, of course, usually you work with like custom fields that are then matched towards the fields in your CRM. And there can't be really that much ambiguity. If you have a custom field that's basically name or telephone number and things like that, then there cannot be really, there's not really much variety for mistakes, but also not much flexibility, okay? So advantages and disadvantages with this. This is sort of like the power engine. This is like you can turn it in a true Mercedes car or like a Porsche, like a Ferrari basically. You can give the user the feeling to be really engaged with another person basically, you know, which is not really the case with these forms here. And I'm pretty much aware that these providers, these tool providers, are also putting AI optionalities in it and everything. So it's always the question of, do I buy it off the shelf and it's a little bit more limited and stuff like that? Or do I build my own thing from scratch using, you know, and then connect it to the CRM? And very often when I talk to my clients, which are usually very techie people, in many instances they're like super nerdy and they think about like doing everything individually and super special and this and that, you know, and not always about just the economics, which is a trap that techies tend to fall into, you know, that they think about innovation, about the technology, you know, they're just like super hyped about technology. And sometimes, you know, this is maybe the better way and the quicker way or whatever, and it's the sufficient way, you know, you don't need to dig out the entire hole from scratch, you know, just to get the outcome that you really want. You know, it's down by the case, and this is basically a real life example that we have been discussing very heavily today and yesterday, and next week we're going to be pitching it, and hopefully we're going to win this case because it's going to be really, really exciting to actually make a difference in this industry of like energy storage. It's like a super important topic, and also help them to distribute their products as much as possible. And so we need to get some German companies on the road to success. There's lots of tricky difficulties we have at the moment there in Germany, sadly. Bye-bye.